Welcome to Thrive Deeper, the show based on the Thrive Bible reading guides. This is an ongoing conversation about God's Word with Thrive's author, Dr. Matthew Jacoby, and your host, DJ Payne.
G'day, it's your old mate DJ Payne here, and welcome to Thrive Deeper, your favourite Bible podcast. It is episode 129. On this episode, Matthew and I are diving deep into the book of Judges. Now, if you have never gone into this Old Testament book before, ooh, doggy, you got to strap on in because things are going to get crazy. Now, I need you to listen carefully to this episode because we have got a very special listener offer just for you to get your hands on an incredible resource that Matthew has done, and you can get it at half price if you listen carefully to this episode. All right, that's enough from me. Let's go for it now into the book of Judges here on Thrive Deeper. At the beginning of the podcast. Oh boy. Matt, it's time to get into this. We literally have just spoken about all the problems of the universe, personally and universally, solve them all.
You actually didn't even pause. At some point, you pressed record in our conversation. And then I assume that was just the start?
Yeah, that's the start.
Well, that's great. All right.
we listen. I'm just going to give Thrive Perspectives a bit of a shout out because the beginning of last week's Thrive Perspectives, which is Matthew racing in here, everyone running late, we need to get this done, and then Matthew spending 15 minutes playing Minecraft with my son.
It was not 15 minutes. It was 5 minutes.
There will never be a beginning like the Thrive Perspectives was. So I'm not going to try to come up with something witty at the beginning of every podcast for fun. I just want to jump into and get going it because, especially, believe it or not, I know I say this every time, nearly every time, every other time, Judges is one of my favourite books in the Bible. And And I know
you're nuts.
And I know that's not a popular statement. I know that's not a popular thing. You know why I put it together today, why I think Judges is one of my favourite books? Because growing up, as everyone knows who knows me, Hebrews was my favourite book in the Bible. Hebrews lists the heroes of the faith.
Yeah.
Two or three of those heroes are Judges.
Yeah.
So I would often, know those stories, I would go back and read Judges as a child.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So I think there's this weird connection.
Yeah. No, Judges, I think about it. It's important background, Judges, and the pattern of Judges that we're going to talk about. I mean, it's very, very important statement about who God is. And it's actually an enormously comforting book.
Yes.
And we'll talk about why that is as we go through it.
Warning, if this is your first time through Judges, look, we believe that it's a comforting, amazing book. It's also one of it's at least R-rated.
I listed some of the things that happened to it. I thought, what rating would I give to this book? And the list of iniquities.
Oh, good Lord!
This book racks up. I think it went beyond R-rated.
Yes,
it was you could not make a movie of this.
Well,
legally.
if you did, it would be a very dark movie. So let's get into it. The book of Judges. It's the 7th book of the Old Testament. Here we've got coming out of the books of Moses, and then we've just gone through the book of Joshua, and so it is covering this period of time. Moses has led the Israelites to the Promised Land. Joshua and some of the other leaders, the rulers, including Caleb and these people, have brought them into the Promised Land. They believed and obeyed God for everything that they said. The amazing time of possessing this land of promise that God has given them. And now we have the book of Judges, which covers roughly around about 350 years, roughly from about 1380 BC, 1,380 years before Christ, to about 1,000 BC, roughly around there, depending on where you age things. It's 21 chapters long. It covers this really, really bizarre time in Israel's history between the settlement of the land and the generations between the settlement of the land to the beginning of the kings.
Yeah, that's right.
And it is one of the most bizarrest time of Israel's history, but it's an important time to understand. And it's also, I believe, an important part of the story of us to understand ourselves as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's what I would describe as a very deep, dark valley spiritually.
Yeah.
Israel go into a really deep, dark valley. But one of the things I often say is that it's often in the darkest places that the light shines the brightest. And
Definitely.
I think there's not a book in the Bible where the grace of God shines more brightly, apart from the moment of Jesus' crucifixion, which is the darkest moment, but also the moment when the light shines most brightly. But the book of Judges, that comes in, I think that comes in next. The way that we see the grace of God work in this dark spiritual valley. Interestingly, this is in the ancient world, in history, and what's going on elsewhere. We're probably around 1200. This is probably from about after 1200.
Yep.
Now, this is the end of the Bronze Age, moving into the Iron Age here.
Yes.
And in the ancient Near East, this is also a black hole in ancient Near Eastern history as well. They speak of a kind of dark age where a lot of the big empires collapsed and the world broke up into smaller nations, and there are no records for a couple, for at least a couple of hundred years, if not more. It's not really until we get into the sort of 900, there's about 300-year block there where historians say we don't know what went on there. It's just
this is the period
shrouded in obscurity, and that's where the Book of Judges is significantly, I think.
Yeah, and it's important to say that's the history that's happening in the Middle East, because we have history of that period in India. We have history of China and Japan have amazing dynasties happening over there at that time. So we have this this book, and the other thing to say right at the beginning, no one's really sure who wrote this book or who compiled it.
No.
Compiled by, probably some of the, leaders of Israel that came after this, putting together maybe in the time of the kings. There's other suggestions around it, but there's no author. There's no author given in the book.
That's right.
And so we don't want to assume anything there.
I mean, you've got statements like, such and such has been there till this day.
Yes.
So it's evident that it was written, this is also because there can be complex histories to writings like this. So there are things, for example, what we see when we get to the to books of Samuel and from there on, it actually refers to records that were being kept at the time.
Yeah.
Records were being kept at the time, but then you've got someone write something later, but then someone might edit that.
Yep.
Later again. And so you get quite complex histories of composition to some of these books, and by the providence of God, we have in it the final form what we have.
Yeah.
We have no reason to believe that they didn't work faithfully with the text, but often it's not what's being changed are not the facts, but they're being shaped for a certain purpose to a later audience, and then, of course, handed through to us.
Yeah, and so
that's how we get the final.
And
form.
even if we don't know the physical authors and compilers to these books, we know and trust that this is, breathed by the Holy Spirit, compiled by Him. We have it for a reason. Now, as we begin, I think we need to talk about, people will come into this book of Judges and they imagine, depending where they grew up. If they grew up in Australia or in the UK, they're going to think of guys in black robes with white wigs and a gavel in their hand, ready to go, or a lawyer, or is this a horrible book of law and judging and judgment?
The Judges. Well, it's the name Judges is I think it was in the Latin Vulgate. It was the name that it was given.
Yes.
In the original Latin Vulgate, so it's traditionally been used as the title for this book. But the name comes actually from a title that's given to the leaders.
Yes.
here. They're referred, at points they're referred to as judges, those who, such and such judged Israel for that long. And that's just a way of saying that person led Israel because part of a leadership role was judging disputes.
And the other side of it here, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, my little bit of homework around it, the Hebrew word translated judge means judge.
Yeah.
It's SHOPHET, S-O-P-H-E-T.
Gee, you got into the details of this.
I love this book, man.
Yeah,
I love this book. I really do.
Right.
I really do. You know when I love a book when we go in deep here. But the idea of this judge in that the Middle Eastern word that was shared around in these cultures was almost like a champion of the people.
Yeah.
And there's also a sense, and I think it's very clear in the book of Judges, of this is a divine judgment. This is a tool or a use, or I'm using this as a divine judgment.
This person.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And they are, and that's actually very evident because what we see quite regularly in this book is the Spirit of the Lord came upon, such and such, and often the Spirit of the Lord is coming upon very questionable people. Now, this is the first thing.
Great theme. This is a great theme.
This is one of the great themes in the book of Judges because we're going to be disappointed if we're looking for great faith heroes. Now, the interesting thing is in the list of heroes of the faith, I mean, we refer to it as heroes of the faith.
Yeah.
In Hebrews, it's just people that had faith and are commended because they had faith.
Yeah.
Everything else could have been wrong with them, but they had faith. And of course, isn't that such a key message of the New Testament?
Amen.
That we're not saved by merit.
Yeah.
We're saved by grace through faith.
Yes.
And hey, let's list in Book of Hebrews, here's a bunch of people that had faith. Jephthah, who was an absolute brigand and whatever, and so...
A warlord.
A warlord,
yeah,
basically. And yet, he had faith, and because he had faith, he was commended.
Yeah,
so
it's incredible.
And so this is a book of God using very crooked sticks to make straight hits.
Oh,
and that's the comfort. That's the first comforting bit. It's like if God can use these guys, then he can use me, and he can use you, and he can use anyone that's listening.
And we learn through that. We learn that, and I hope you will learn as you read this and keep this in mind. That I'm going to tie it into, and we're probably going to start doing this more and more, tying it into previous episodes. I think of what we spoke about, Matthew, on the Thrive Perspectives episode that was just fairly recent about who rules the world. And in the culmination is, of course, yes, God rules the world through his chosen vessel, through men.
Yeah, that's right.
Through men and women, through humankind. That's the way he's chosen to do it. We see here in the book of Judges that truth ringing out so loudly because God is like, I'm not going to intervene, just me.
Yeah, I'm going to do it through people.
I'm going to do it through people. And you know what? I'll do it with the best people I can find, even if they're the worst people I can find.
Right. Well, and this is the interesting thing about this book is that as we meet these people, people like Jephthah and Samson, you're thinking, and this is I think quite intentional in the book.
Yes.
Okay, this is the leader. The leader is meant to be sort of the best guy that you can find.
Yeah.
Is this the best guy? Is this the best person that God can find? Because,
they're not so good.
Because they're not so good. So that actually is a real indictment on the state of the people as a whole.
Big time.
So their leaders, if this guy is being chosen as the leader, then man, these people must be in a really bad way. And of course, that's part of the message.
And if you pay attention, and one of the, as you mentioned before, Matt, we're not really meant, to speak to this. I don't think the book of Judges, and I've heard different, scholars or preachers or anything talk about this. Some people treat it like this is a chronological history timeline. Mm-hmm. But a lot of scholars will go, actually, a lot of these, the different judges we meet are from different tribes.
Yeah.
They're scattered around.
Yeah.
They could be overlapping in timelines. They could be even backwards.
Yeah.
But there's a narrative purpose in the book of Judges where the judges are gradually getting worse.
That's right.
And worse.
That's right.
And worse.
Yeah. Because, the most well-known figure in the book of Judges would be Samson, I think, probably Gideon and then Samson. Samson is he leaves a lot to be desired. He's an absolute fool.
Yeah.
He does the amount of things that he does against the law of God. That it's the character. When he breaks his vows, he marries a foreign woman. He has flights of passion. The guy, you would think is a lost cause, but you know what? God says, "All right, I'll use this one."
Yeah,
and he does.
And he does, and that's about the faith and grace and the side there. Now,
so you're right. I think that's a good point, though, that you make. That the book, it's not necessarily ordered chronologically. That is the pattern. And in fact, right at the end of the book, in those last few chapters, we get you. You just got to read it to believe how shocking this story actually is. These stories actually are. Yeah. Those stories may have happened earlier on. Yeah. But the book wants to culminate in that to show this is how bad things got.
So, and you mentioned there the end of the book, and we'll get more into it, on the next episode in a fortnight's time. Yeah. But right at the end of the book, and mentioned throughout the book, but in the last chapters, there's a theme. Yeah. That is the theme throughout the whole, the whole book. The last verse in the book of Judges 21, 25, in those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the theme of the book of Judges.
Yeah, and it says, in those days Israel had no king, and it makes that statement, I think, at least a couple of times. Yeah. And then a couple of times in those days Israel had no king. So, some people have read this as, indicating that the book of Judges is really just an apologetic for the monarchy later on. Yeah. I think that's too minimalist. I think that's part of it. Yes. Because that was always part of God's plan, right? It was always part of God's plan for Israel to have a king. And we know that's particularly important because the king is the Lord's anointed, and God establishes a dynasty with David that it's going to lead to Christ, right? Yeah. So the kingship is very important. Yeah. And so this is kind of showing why we need our king. And from a New Testament perspective, it's not just an apologetic for a political monarchy in ancient Israel. No. It's basically the rationale. It's showing something about human nature. Amen. To show this is actually why we need the ultimate king, who is Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. It really points to Jesus in such a powerful way. One last thing before we get into, having a look at the overview of the book, Matt. The other big important, I wouldn't say theme, but I love the fact that the opening of the book, the people who are putting this together and the Lord putting this book together, in chapter 2, he takes a moment to say, okay, stop. I'm going to tell you the pattern of the entire book here now, just so you're all aware, because you've got to be reading this book. This book is confusing. You're going to read this book and going, what is going on? Lord, what are you doing? Yeah. But he takes a moment in chapter 2 and basically says, now, this is the theme of the book.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's just look at we'll look at chapter 1 and we'll look at chapter 2, and we might today, I think, look at at least the first few Judges. Yes. And that'll, I think, give us a sense of this pattern. Now, chapter 1 is important because chapter 1 is basically illustrating how they got to to where things get to by the end of the book. Now, even though we're not talking chronologically, but how did things get that bad, right? By the time you get to the end of the book, you've got Israel in the most terrible, terrible state. Yep. What chapter 1 shows is that this began actually with small compromises, with maybe excusable compromises. It wasn't them doing bad things. Yep. It was them failing to do the good things 100%. That they should have done.
They might have did it 92% or 80%, obedience.
Well, they actually did. Yeah. I'm not sure about the percentage. Yeah. But the first chapter talks about, they went up. It says they, in fact, verse 2, I'll just read the first couple of verses, actually, from from Judges chapter 1. Yes. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, who of us is to go up first to fight the Canaanites? The Lord answered, Judah shall go up. I've given the land into their hands. So that verse is important because, again, God is saying, I've given you the land, right? Now, that's the theme I've given it to you, but you need to actually take it. You need to go and take it.
And that's the theme of the book of Joshua.
That's the theme of the book of Joshua. Now, what actually happens? that happens very tangibly in the book of Joshua, because from a military point of view, the overall strength of the alliances in the book amongst the kings of the Canaanites is broken, right? So they've basically had their, perhaps you could say, their D-Day, even better than D-Day actually. They've really broken.
Yeah.
They've broken the main military back of the Canaanites.
Yes.
Okay, so two massive alliances, they completely destroy, right?
Yeah.
So now the people groups withdraw to the to
their
the hills,
tribes.
to their tribes, and they're often up in the hills, and so what this is saying here is, okay, Joshua, before he goes, okay, we've done the majority here. Now it's for you, and this is what you get in the sort of around the middle chapters of Joshua when it's talking about the allotments of the land. Joshua's saying, hey, we've done the lion's share. We've broken the back with it. The enemy's teeth have been, now go and
finish it off.
Go and finish it off.
Yeah.
And take the land. And what Judges 1 shows is this steady compromise. So Judah does okay, but then as we go down, verse 19, the Lord was with the men of Judah. They took possession of the hills. So the Judah actually does okay, which is why I think God starts with them.
Yes.
But it says the Benjaminites, however, did not drive out the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites live there with the Benjamites. Again, interesting comment. Interesting to think about maybe when that was. But anyway. Yes. And then it, goes and says, but verse 27, but Manasseh did not drive out the people of Bethshan or Tanakh or Dor. Verse 28, when Israel became strong, they pressed the Canaanites into forced labor, but never drove them out completely. Nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites living in Gezer. Verse 30, neither did Zebulun drive out the Canaanites living. And verse 31, nor did Asher drive out those living in Akko or Sidon. Verse 32, they did not drive them out. Verse 33, neither did Naphtali drive out those living in Beth Shemesh or Beth Anath. Verse 34, the Amorites confined the Danites to the hill country, not allowing them to come down to the plain. Yeah. So, by the time we get to the Danites, who are probably, in the worst situation, it's just like compromise. Now, the sort of epitaph that you could put over this section is they could have, but they didn't.
Yeah.
They could have because God gave it to them, but they just didn't.
Yeah.
And it's this compromise, them allowing these people, because look, contemporary audience, contemporary readers will say, hang on, that's a bit, let them stay, for goodness sake. What's the harm, God? What's the big deal? Let them stay. Well, as we read Deuteronomy, God through Moses says, if you let them stay, they will certainly be snares. Yeah. Not only will they draw you into the worship of their gods, not only will they do it for certain, that's what they'll do if you let them stay, but then they will also oppress you. Mm. And what the book of Judges shows is that is exactly what happens.
Yeah,
so they don't drive them out. The book of Judges is the sort of apologetic, the vindication, I should say,
of Moses'
edict. We find, we may find really harsh, but this is, apart from, we've talked about the important prefigurative element of that. But it was, as well as that, very important aspect of this.
Yeah.
This is the ultimate preemptive strike by God, who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And told them they've all got to go,
or else
compromise leads to this.
So it's almost like, back in the book of Deuteronomy, when Moses, the amazing prophet of God, told them what was going to happen, what would happen. The Judges is a culmination of exactly that. So we almost have these two prologues in the book of Judges. Chapter 1 gives us a overview of that with the people, and then we get this crazy chapter 2 that sort of outlays the whole thing, and it starts off with the Lord's messenger coming to the people saying...
Yeah, what's interesting, it doesn't say who.
Yeah.
There's no name mentioned there, which is interesting because normally there would be a nominated person to receive this revelation, but you don't get that.
Yeah, it just says, or at least in my translation here, the angel of the Lord went up, from Gilgal and said to the Israelites, and it basically gives you exactly what Moses had predicted, what we've just read in chapter 1, At the end there, in verse 3, the angel of the Lord says, "So now I declare that I will no longer drive out of the people living from your land. They will be thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a constant temptation to you."
Yeah, that's right.
And the people who heard that wept bitterly.
Yep.
They received it as the judgment it was meant to. And then eventually we see the rest of chapter 2 outlays the cycle.
That's right.
And
I think this cycle, it's basically telling us what we're about to read in the book of Judges in more. It's a very interesting structure, this book, actually. So I might just read this, I think, because it's indicative of the rest of the book. I think it's worth having a look. So I think I'm going to read from verse 10.
Okay.
It talks about Joshua. The people served the Lord during Joshua's time, but when Joshua died, there wasn't another godly leader. And remember, part of this again is pointing to the need for a godly king and so forth.
Yes.
Okay, verse 10. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who neither knew the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Now, from in the light of Deuteronomy, teach your children. Teach them, write it discuss it when you're at the table, write it on the doors, wear it on your heads, talk about it when you're sitting around the table. They're being held responsible for that implicitly here. So after that, this generation grows up who neither knew the Lord nor what he had done for Israel, despite the piles of stones that they put up and all the different commemorative festivals that have been instituted, and they're who's the Lord? What had he done? Okay, so verse 11. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who brought them up out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. Verse 14. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. Think about the New Testament equivalent of that is Romans chapter 1. Yes. So God gave them over.
Yep.
He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Interesting comment that they were no longer able to resist them. So it's like Jesus' statement, to those who have, more will be given, but those who don't have, even what they have will be taken away.
Yes.
If you don't have a willingness to obey, I'm going to take away whatever strength you do have and just give you over wholesale to disobedience, to link that up with Paul's statement.
Yeah.
So verse 15, whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. They were in great distress. Then, verse 16, the Lord raised up judges, from which we get the title of the book. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshipped them. They quickly turned from the ways of their ancestors who had been obedient to the Lord's commands. When the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge, saved them out of the hands of their enemies as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the people returned to ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, and that's the structure of the book. It gets worse and worse.
Yes.
Following other gods and serving and worshipping them, they refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. That's the cycle of the book.
Right there. That will help us understand what we're going to go into now, because we're going to go into some crazy stories.
Yeah.
We're going to meet some really interesting individuals, and the whole time we need to have this cycle going in the back of the mind. What part of the cycle are they in? This is what's happening.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And what it highlights is, on the one hand, the weakness, the unfaithfulness of people compared with the faithfulness of God. Because no matter how many times they, after being oppressed, exactly what God said would happen to them, they cry out to the Lord.
Yeah.
Then the Lord comes and saves them.
Yeah.
Every single time they cry out to the Lord. Maybe not straight away, might leave them there for, but he comes and he saves them every single time.
And he saves them through a judge.
That's right.
Through a human agent.
Yeah.
Now, one quick point before we head into the break, Matt, I want to make a point here at the beginning of this book, before we start going and meeting some of these judges. Us enlightened, so educated individuals in the year 2021 and onwards, as people listen to this, we have the tendency to sit there in our high towers and read these books and say, oh, look at these primitive warlike people with their hearts away from God. How could they be so silly? Oh, Lord, thank you that I'm not like these people and that I do not fault and I am, living in this enlightened age and yada, yada, yada. I don't think that's the attitude we're meant to have when reading this book.
No. This is, this book, I think, as I said, what this book highlights is something about the weakness of human nature. And after the break, actually, I'll talk a little bit about idolatry, what they were facing and why it was so tempting for them. Because there is a tendency for us to look at these people and say, they're just, what a bunch of idiots. Yeah. How could they keep doing that? As if we wouldn't.
Yes.
Now,
and as if not
we
only
do that all the time.
Yeah.
That is such a human characteristic. We look back at ages past. I just get so tired of how could those people living in World War II go with that? It's like, so you wouldn't have if you were there. How could how could those people get drawn into this movement or that movement in the middle? We're assuming that if we were there, we wouldn't have.
Whereas even if we look at what's happening...
We love judging the peoples of the past aloof and saying, if I was there,
exactly.
I would not have done that.
Yeah. And I think a point of the book of Judges, at least for me, has been to see myself in these people.
Yeah.
And to ask God, what part of the cycle am I in right now?
Good question.
In my heart... Because, again, I'm being very, personalised here. But also, I think there's part of looking at in culture as well in the history. Because if we look at history over the thousands of years from this is a great cycle of history as well.
Yeah, that's right.
That people prosper, there's good times, people get their guard down, it leads to bad times.
Yeah, we see that even in church history as well.
Yes.
Absolutely.
All right, so there we go. There's a setup of the book of Judges. Let's take a quick break right now and we'll be back to actually meet some of these crazy characters and see what it's all about here on Thrive Deeper. Hey family, it's your old mate DJ Payne here, and thank you so much for downloading and listening to this episode of Thrive Deeper. I want to give a big special shout out to everybody that's been in touch with us and let us know how much the podcasts mean to them. It goes a long way. Your little comment might just take you 2 minutes to do. Trust me, it is a refreshing tonic drink to Matthew and I to hear what God is doing in your life through these episodes that we do. Now, you can do all of that at thrivetoday.tv. Now, while you're there, pay special attention. Right at the top of the website, it has a listener's special offer. That is you. You are our listener, and we have a special offer just for you. If you click on that, you will see a video series that Matthew has done around his book, Deeper Places. It's an amazing spiritual journey through the book of Psalms. You want to feel closer to God. You want to be more in touch with what God is doing in your life and how he wants to draw you in. This is a great place to start as Matthew takes us in an amazing video series, 7 videos taking us through his book, Deeper Places. I might be biased, but I think it's a really great series, and I know God can use it in your life to help you in your Christian walk. So if you want to take hold of this, we've got an amazing offer. It is now 50% off, half price. Usually in Australia it's $20 to get all 7 videos. Now it is only $10. You might be thinking, I don't know if I've got the time. Trust me, you watch the first one, Matthew will hook you right in, and you can use it as a personal study or even in a small group, whether that's with your family or with people who are close to you. You can use it right now. All you need to do is go over to thrivetoday.tv, click on the link and use our special coupon code THRIVE. It's pretty easy. You can't miss that one. THRIVE. Use that in the coupon code and it'll take 50% off the price just for you. Wherever you are in the world, you can use it over at thrivetoday.tv. All right, that is enough from me. Let's get back into this crazy book of Judges here on this episode of Thrive Deeper. It's DJ, and with me, as always, is Matt Jacoby, and you are on Thrive Deeper. This is part one of a two-part series we're doing on the book of Judges here on Thrive Deeper, and we've just set up the book and the cycle, the themes, everything there, the historical period, and why it's so important. Matt, before we get into what's the big deal with idolatry in the book of Judges, I wanted to do something and just fly through, because this might be the only time we mention all of the names here. There's roughly about 15 judges in the book of Judges. So I wanted to fly through, give them a bit of a shout out. If you've got any quick comments for any of the smaller ones, feel free to sing out. We start, and again, the important thing is it's not chronological, and
they're not sequential. One didn't take over from the other.
Exactly.
In fact, if you map them out, they're equally spread all over all over Canaan.
Now, I haven't had time to actually research this myself. But I've seen one scholar say that there are, people count the judges in different ways. Some people count 12 judges from 12 different tribes. I'm
not sure if it's that neat.
I don't know if it's that neat. I don't know if it is. But the point is they're spread out over the whole land, and it's all very tribal in what's happening there.
Yeah.
So we start off with Othniel, who was the first judge of Israel. He ruled for 40 years. We see that right at the beginning there. And then we have Ehud. Ehud was the second judge. He was the great left-handed man from the tribe of Benjamin. We might touch on him a little bit later on. Shamgar was the third judge of Israel. But the book of Judges doesn't state how long he ruled.
Yeah, well, he gets one line, I think.
I know. He gets one verse, I think. Then we have Deborah, the judge, who's the fourth judge, of Israel here. She was also a prophet and the wife of Lapidoth, I think his name is. We see her story in Judges 4 and 5. Then we get Gideon, the son of Joash the Abiezrite in the town of Ophrah. We're going to get into his story a little bit later on. From there, we get and this is where some people argue, hang on, this guy's not really a judge. But this is the only judge in the book, if we count him as a judge, who isn't God ordained. This is Abimelech, who is the son of Gideon. He becomes a judge of Israel, but not by God's will. So he rules in a horrible way in part of that story. Then we have Tola, the seventh judge. Jair, the eighth judge, he lasted for 22 years. Jephthah, the ninth judge of Israel, his story covers a couple of chapters and is a really interesting story. Ibzan, the 10th judge. Elon, the Zebulunite, the 11th judge of Israel, he lasted for 10 years. Abdon. Then we have Samson, the 13th judge. He lasted for 20 years. Eli, the high priest. He lasted for 40 years. And then we have the final judge, the prophet Samuel.
Yeah. So, of course, Eli and Samuel, we meet them in the book of Samuel.
Yeah. Yeah. But they are...
they're the last two judges.
They're the last two judges of Israel. So we have these 15 characters. Now, the other thing I was going to read out is the cast of enemies that we see, the people like the Canaanites and
I would say Eli. Would we call him a judge though?
I think
he was the high priest. Not sure. Certainly, Samuel is generally considered to be the last judge.
One of the lines I think in early Samuel is that Eli ruled over Israel for 40 years. It uses the same language as the book of Judges, so that's why some people.
I'll give that to you.
And again, the number isn't important. It doesn't matter whether we call him a judge or not. Now, there's basically, out of all of that cast of characters, there are 6 major judges that I think it's worth that the book of Judges gives more time to, and I think is worth having a look at as we go into a little bit deeper. But the theme for all of these 6 major judges that we come to, Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, Gideon, Jephthah, Samson, these people as we go into it. One of the major themes is idolatry, and it's the fact that the Israelite people will not stop going after other gods other than the one that they know is the one that brought them into the land, the true God. And there's records of it around. There's altars, the books that are flying around. They have a sort of distance memory, and then there's some wandering priests wandering around of this God. But despite all of that, they keep adding to that God, the gods of the people around them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and we'll talk a little later about how that unfolds, because I think that's interesting.
Yeah,
and that's where we can learn a bit from that, and perhaps not distance ourselves from this. So I'm going to just start at the beginning, and we'll work with the first few, and then we'll cover the rest and the last chapters next week. About Othniel, you get this statement in 3 verse 10. The Spirit of the Lord came on him, and he became Israel's judge and went to war. It's significant that that's there in the first judge. Now we don't explicitly have that set of all the judges, but there is this set. God is at work here, raising up judges. God's action of raising up these fairly imperfect people.
And it doesn't use exactly the same phrase either. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him. Was it Gideon who it says, and the Spirit of the Lord clothed him, which is a beautiful turn of phrase. And, we have this idea of the Spirit of God coming and going from these judges to empower them to do what God
yeah, that's
wants,
right. So that God is using these people. Interesting when we get to David. This is where you get a contrast, because in the case of the judges, actually, and this is true right up to Saul, actually, King Saul.
Yeah.
Because of King Saul, it says, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he delivered Israel, I think it was from the Ammonites.
Yes.
So he has the same experience. The Holy Spirit comes upon him, and there's a little bit about that. We get a bit more detail in Saul's case, but it's temporary.
Yes.
What we get with David is something new. And this is, I think, the point, particularly David as this prefigurative sort of messianic figure. It says the Spirit of the Lord came upon him and did not depart.
Yeah.
And
that's very different.
That's right. And so I think that there's a pattern set up here that is going to sort of set up for what happens with David. Now, then we get, so Ehud, it's interesting with a lot of these guys that they are, in various ways, they're described, as having various faults. Ehud is a left-handed man. Being left-handed in the ancient world was kind of seen as like a disability. I know,
we're very progressive these days.
Yeah, that's right. If you're left-handed, of course, it's no disability.
Yeah.
But that's just the way that it was seen in the ancient world.
We've got to remember that the word sinister comes from the idea of being left-handed.
Right. Is it okay?
Yeah. So that the idea, and that really sounds foreign to us. What? And in every depiction of the devil in ancient art, he's left-handed and God is right-handed. Yeah. So this idea of a left-handed hero is quite unusual. And of course, one part of it is God saying, "I don't really care if you're left-handed or not." I mean, that doesn't really mean anything. Yeah. But we have this crazy story of Ehud, and the other pattern that we should mention is a lot of these leaders. We're thinking we can't get past the word in our modern mind of a judge. A lot of these guys are what we could say as military leaders or revolutionaries or
they're warlords, really.
Warlords. Yeah. Some of them are almost like mafia kings type. They read like that. But so we have these basically amazing warriors that God is going to use in a very bloody and gruesome way, often, fighting against the enemies. And
so the story of Ehud is really an assassination. It's not, there's not a war here so much. Well, there is at the end, but what he does is that he assassinates Eglon, the king of Moab, who's this big fat man. Yeah. He goes in with the ruse of having a message and goes to turn back and whispers to the king. And of course he's left-handed, so he's not expecting. He pulls out the sword and he plunges it into his belly, and it gives us the detail of it sinks in, his fat closes over and his bowels discharge. I mean, this is a classic. This is the Book of Judges. Yeah. This is how we roll in the Book of Judges.
Yeah. And it so much so that the handle disappeared beneath the king's fat. He couldn't get that thing out. And then Ehud closed, locked the doors of the room, and then escaped down the latrine of the like this. It's like like a movie. It's like a movie here. He escapes out through the sewer pipes. And away he goes. And it sort of shows you that God is able to use anyone in these crazy stories. In saving his people. He's so invested in saving his people when they're crying out to him.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So Shamgar, as we said, gets one line. Now, it's interesting, though, that just this little detail that he struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad. Ox goad is like a stick that you would prod your oxen with. So not a weapon of warfare. But the point here is that this is being done in the strength of the Lord. This is God working through these people. That's what that line is meant to denote. Then we get to Deborah. This is an interesting story.
This is an interesting one, and I'd love to make this point. And again, this is not going to be a popular point, so I'll make it.
Yeah,
I'm happy to make it. Matthew's like, thank you. We get the story of a left-handed man, like, man alive, God's going to use a left-handed man?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, it's almost like when it comes to chapter 4, the book of Judges goes, no, Ehud, hold my drink over here.
Yeah.
God's even going to use a woman.
Yeah. Well, in the ancient world, that's a thing. In the ancient world, and look, this is war and battle, and it was a men's business, in the ancient world, and so you're absolutely right. The fact that, and in fact, the two heroes of this story are Deborah and Jael, and they're both women, and actually that's an important point
massively
in the story, because the men, the leaders really are all flaking out here, and it's the women who get the job done. So, Deborah is this prophetess who is leading Israel at the time, and God speaks to her and says, go up against who is it that they're going against?
Commands you 10,000 warriors. The Caesarea, the commander of Jabin's army.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Caesarea.
Yeah, King Jabin of Canaan. Okay, so he's one of the Canaanites who reigns in Hazor. Okay. Anyway, so but this hardy warrior.
Yeah. Barak.
Yeah, Barak.
Yeah.
Says
who obviously as a prophet, this is a really interesting point here, and I love this is the mystery of the Bible, especially the Old Testament. They just cross over it. They don't really go into depth of this.
Yeah.
Deborah, who happens to be a prophet, judging Israel, sitting under this tree, giving God. It's like, wait a minute, how does this work? How is this working in this thing? But it sort of shows you that part of this is this isn't God's norm. This isn't God's prescription or a pattern how God wants to see things. This is what's just happening. God is using, like we've said already, God will use whoever he wants. Even this woman who's, not saying that she's not doing God's will, but she's outside of God's norm.
Your point, in the context of the ancient world, I know, we've got to think in that culture. We've got to read this off that culture. And that, that meant, so even the fact that Barak, this general, when she says, go out, get 10,000 men and go up against this army, Barak in verse 8 says to her, if you go with me, I will go, but if you don't go with me, I won't go.
Yeah.
I mean,
crazy.
Okay, certainly, and this is a very important verse in verse 9. She says, certainly I will go with you, said Deborah, but because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman.
Yeah.
So that's in a sense, it's made explicit there that this is women doing what in those days was very much a man's job. So anyway, they rout the army, but Sisera, the leader of the army they're going against, he flees into the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Now she's related to Moses, actually.
Yeah.
Through. We're not exactly, because it's just slightly unclear exactly what, we won't go into those details, but she's related to Moses. This woman, Jael, she takes him in. She says, come, my Lord, come right in, don't be afraid. And then when he goes to sleep, she drives a tent peg through his head into the ground. Welcome to the book of Judges yet again. It's like the second death that's described is described in some detail, and it's absolutely macabre.
Yeah.
So she kills. So Jael, this woman, this faithful woman, is given power over this army general that all the other guys are chasing, can't catch.
Yeah.
But she kills him.
And here's the interesting point, right? This is where I'm going to throw a weird spatter in the works, and this is the Bible nerd in me.
Yeah.
In Hebrews 11, in the list of the faith, the heroes of the faith, Barak is mentioned. In this,
Right.
in the thing, is one of the people.
Is
of
he
faith.
really?
So let me go to it. In Hebrews 11, verse 32, the writer of Hebrews says, "Hey, what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell you of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah." He lists those people from Judges, and it's like, Barak, you're listing him. He's like this loser.
What about Jael? You'd think that she would get the mention.
What about Deborah?
Yeah.
So, and again, this is just me being a nerd. That's why.
But you know what? You know why I think that is?
Yeah.
And this is going to the text.
Yes.
Because Deborah, I know Deborah, so formally speaking, Deborah is the judge, but she's actually the prophet. She is playing the part of the prophet here.
Yeah.
So she delivers God's word.
Yes.
She says, go and do this. He goes, right, but he says, but I want you to go with me. And there's something...
he's got faith.
There's a step. This is not. She says, "Well, okay, but then the credit is going to go to me rather than to you." But still, he's still responding to God's command to go, and so there's enough faith there
for him to be listed. Yeah, and again, this is going to. I don't want to upset anybody here because I know for some people Deborah's held up as, and she's an amazing prophet. We see this in the next chapter. Obviously, we have a song of Deborah's recorded, but maybe she wasn't the sparkling character that we
possibly not.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
well, I think that there are no sparkling characters in this book, so
exactly.
So we don't need to assume that she was.
And so we go into chapter 5. Now, chapter 5 is often called the Song of Deborah. But chapter 5, verse 1 says, on that day, Deborah and Barak sang, sang this song. And so they sang together, and it's basically a wartime song.
Yeah, that's right. Of celebrating the victory.
Celebrating the victory, relaying the story of death and macabre. And it goes on for an entire chapter there of, talking about... but the beautiful thing it does in this era is it does this chapter especially, and there's a little side tangent for anybody who wants to go down here. It really does show you that the ideas that we have about women and men's roles in ancient Jerusalem are not as stereotypical as what we think. Yeah. Because this song that is recorded in Scripture really lists, women as being used by God as much as men.
Yeah, that's right. Let me point out. So we've just covered those 4 judges, but let me point out the pattern here is that Othniel's account starts in 3 verse 7.
Yes,
it starts with the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord.
Yes,
they forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Ashtoreths. Okay, so then God raises, and then they're oppressed.
Yep.
God raises up Othniel, and they're delivered. Right.
Yep.
Story of Ehud, beginning of the story of Ehud, verse 12. 3 verse 12. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel. So this theme of them being given over.
Yes.
And so they're oppressed. They cry out to God. God raises up.
It's the pattern we
Ehud.
see.
And then we just get a mention of Shamgar, but we assume that's the same thing.
Yep.
Chapter 4 starts with the words, again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Now Ehud was dead. Yeah. So the Lord sold them into the hands. So that again, God is giving them over. They're oppressed. And you get, but God delivers them through Deborah. So you've got this constant process of, but when it says by doing evil in the eyes of the Lord, what they're doing, as the explainer, and in many cases it adds this detail, but from chapter 2 we know what is meant by that is that they turn to the gods of the Canaanites.
Yes.
Let's spend some time on that, because we get to chapter 6 and it says the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years God gave them into the hands of the Midianites, and that's where we get Gideon.
Yes.
Let me, because I want to take some time actually to talk about this constant temptation that they were faced with.
Yeah. Because we look at it now, as we mentioned before, as foolishness.
When did you last walk past a statue of a pagan god and feel tempted to bow down and worship that thing? Yeah. I mean, for us, I think it's difficult for us to really grasp what the big deal was. Okay, so let's try and get ourselves in the mindset of these ancient people.
I guess for some people, I have heard some people, not to be tempted to worship it, but I guess the only thing that would be, for some listeners listening right now, might have experienced something where they've travelled abroad and they might have gone to a Chinese temple, a Japanese temple, a Buddhist temple, something like that, or a mosque or something like that. My only experience is something of those type of things. I've been to a couple of mosques, in Dubai. I've been to some amazing Catholic cathedrals, in some different places around the world, and you feel a sense of awe.
Yep.
You feel a sense of awe around these places. You go, wow, there's something special here. But even in those, for me, correct me if I'm wrong here, I didn't think, well, I'm going to now.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm tossing in Christianity to go worship that.
I've walked. I've been into temple areas, not the inner areas. Well, I have been in some temples in India and because I wanted to learn as much about about it as I could while I was there, but at no time did I feel tempted in any way. So which is why we need to kind of understand the mindset here.
Yes.
So these are people I think who are. Well, for a start, the difference probably between us and them is that they're in a much more what we would call a spiritually porous state, very sensitive to the spiritual world, far more than I would say the average person is.
So hang on, you said the word poorer, so I'm thinking they're not as well off as I am.
It's a.
Do you mean porous or
as in porous, like a porous rock, absorbent?
Okay.
Yeah. So, and by that, I guess we're probably culturally conditioned in a slightly different way to be more skeptical and naturally. Yes. Why would I? It's what the philosopher Charles Taylor refers to as a buffered. That we're more sort of buffered.
Yes.
We have to be sort of convinced before we engage. Whereas this state of porousness, that's more like this immediate intuition of the spiritual, and you see that amongst, I guess, what we would describe as more primitive peoples that have this much more immediate awareness of the spiritual world.
Okay.
And there's something. There's something about that that I think is good, but that level of sensitivity comes with some issues right now. So we've also got to remember that the entities that we're dealing, the gods Baal and Ashtoreths, and these are, from a sort of worldview perspective, while the idols themselves are just wood and stone and whatever, there are real spiritual entities behind this, and the all of the warnings in the book of Deuteronomy of Moses about going into the land and not practicing, spiritualism and divining and all of these different practices that really are occult, full-on occult practices. Yeah. I think show that this is very common for the ancient world. But I think we, recognizing that there's what we might refer to in some senses as territorial spirits. I mean, we did a Thrive Perspectives episode on the spiritual realm and these other Elohim that the Bible speaks about, these other spiritual beings.
Yeah.
And this is what's really behind these gods.
And we see that, there's a couple of instances in the first few books of the Bible, Genesis with the Tower of Babel, and then also Moses talking about, the division of the land in Deuteronomy is clearly pointing out that there are spiritual entities,
that's right.
not of God,
but
they are on who are claiming to be gods, working over this land, and this is what they're going into.
That's right. And so, I mean, Paul makes that statement in Romans chapter 1 where he gives them over, and God gave them over to a depraved mind, gave them over to the gods that they worshipped. And so anyway, so the point is, so when they're going into this land, in their heads as ancient people, they're going into territory that's controlled by this spirit, and they're terrified, right? Yeah. They're terrified. We might go in and look, if you're aware of this sort of thing, you might have some fear if you go into if we're in situations like this, but more commonly we're inclined to be a bit skeptical. There's no skepticism in these people. No. When they go into this area, this is Baal's, for example, this is Baal's territory. They're terrified of that.
A cultural thing, when I've taught this book in the past or done a Bible study around this book, one way that I've tried to bring our modern mindset into this mindset is to say, imagine that you grew up, in pick a country, I don't know where, India, in the backwaters of India. And, you live in the tribal areas of India. Now, when I'm not talking spiritual, I'm talking culturally. Yeah. I'm talking culturally. You experience your life, you've got a caste system and something like that. And then all of a sudden you're picked up, whatever, you go to study in London, England. Yeah. And then you are brought in, they say you've got an audience somehow before the Queen. Yeah. And there's Queen crowns everywhere you go, on the gates, on the doors, everywhere. There's crown, her pictures everywhere. Lineage of the crown everywhere. You're going into a foreign territory that is controlled by this monarch that is everywhere. Now, you might not be terrified, but you might go, man, I need to start adopting some of their culture. I need to start adopting some of their way of thinking because I'm operating in this system. Yeah,
that's right. So so that fear of this is a territory controlled by Baal, and remember, the way that they see it is that every part of life everything is spiritual, right? So whether I have crops, whether my children are going to live to adulthood, whether I'm even going to be able to have children, whether the river is going to keep flowing, whether the rain is going to come down, everything is controlled by the gods, right? So if I don't get, get on the right side of the local gods, nothing is going to work out for me. Yeah. So the temptation there is, and also, and also the cults were very kind of often involved sexuality. So that was, again,
temptation.
That was a massive temptation. They were to be drawn into those cults through that's kind of sexual doorway. The other thing is that for ancient people, remember the Israelites as ancient people, there's still the idea in the ancient world of one transcendent God that has no image associated with him. Yeah. That is very difficult for an ancient person to work with. Yeah. This is why they were so tempted, when Aaron made that God, because the people said, we need something, give us something tangible here.
We're terrified.
Yeah. So he gives them the calf, and that was meant to represent, here is the God. Yeah. Who let us out? I'll give them a representation, and engrave some kind of image for them, something tangible. But and God forbade that, because God is a transcendent God, and he will not be reduced to a territorial God or to anything that
is an image of any living thing.
That's right, or even anything that's on a equal footing. It's just, he's just an alternate God. Well, there's Baal and there's Ashtoreth and there's Yahweh. He's not willing to be put on the same level as them, and so he's not a finite God. He's not just one God who's part of the ancient pantheon who just has battles with the other gods. No. That's not. He is the He is the one true, ultimate, transcendent God. Now that this has been, I guess, the revelation of this for the Israelites, even though it goes back, ancient. They're in a world where where we need something more sort of tangible. Now, add to that the fact, if we ascribe, a degree of reality, as we've said, to these false gods.
Yes.
There's a level of, because they're more imminent. God was present with his people, but there's a level of imminence to these gods. You can bargain with these gods. This is what was attractive about this. I can, I can do a bargain with Baal, and that'll assure me that my crops are going to grow. But with God, you don't bargain with God.
It's all or nothing.
Yeah,
it's all or nothing.
That's right.
And
so
the other factor here
appeal.
The other factor. Well, yeah, and again, when we say we bargain, a lot of times it was there was gifts and there was sacrifices. The ultimate one, and a very common one, was sacrificing your own children.
Yeah, that's right.
To these gods. So it was a dark.
And you might wonder, well, why would they go to that length?
Yeah.
Because it was, that's how afraid they were. They needed this assurance.
Yeah.
And so, if the greatest sacrifice that I can offer to the local territorial gods is to give one of my children to allow the other 13 or 14,
yes.
because remember having I'm going to give
families.
one and that will allow the rest to survive.
Yep.
Then hey, I'm willing to pay that price.
Exactly.
That's the kind of mindset that they're in, because they really believe. Yes, we've heard about this Yahweh, but man, I can't see, it doesn't seem very imminent. These other gods seem way more imminent.
And the other factor on top of that, if you're a young person coming up in a new generation, you've heard these stories about some Yahweh God that brought your ancestors into this land.
Yeah.
But right now, I'm being oppressed by these Canaanites who have this God over here. They're winning.
Yeah.
They're winning at the moment. So, you know what? I'm just going to go with the flow.
Yeah, that's right. And look, and the fact is that you're surrounded by, you can't see Yahweh, the God of Israel, but I've got there's all these images of these gods. And so that's, that's the problem here. There is this magnetism that the culture really has for these people. It's drawing them in, because how can I not follow suit here? I'm terrified not to. Yeah. There would have been cultural pressure to go along with it. And so at first, actually, what would have happened, and I say cultural pressure because if it was going to rain on everyone, then everyone had to offer the sacrifice to Baal. It wasn't enough just for one person. So anyway, so what invariably would have happened is that they would have said, yes, we worship Yahweh, but you know what? We're just going to cover all bases here.
Yeah.
We'll offer sacrifices to the Baals and the Ashtoreths, cover that base, keep them happy, keep Yahweh happy, go down to Shiloh. It doesn't actually say what was happening there, but if they did that, okay, we'll do that too.
Yes.
And then you get this drift where actually the pagan practices start taking over.
Now, we've said all of that to give our modern minds a little bit of an insight as what's going on with this 3,000-year-old ancient mind, of humans, and we like to say that we're so far removed.
Yeah,
I'm serving you up a softball here, Matt.
Yeah,
I believe we're meant to be reading this not as going, now I understand the ancient mind.
Yeah,
this is telling us about ourselves and our modern mind with the culture that we live in.
Yeah, that's right.
So, what's the application for us?
Well, this is where we need to think about. So, move away from we don't bow down to engraven statues, so therefore this doesn't apply to us. No, it does, because cultural pressures have always been there, always. Powerful cultural pressures. And sometimes they're so close and so imminent, and they can seem so normal and so justifiable that we don't even notice them. These pagan practices, I'll just carry this amulet. Going back to then, I'll just I'll just go through this. You can't do any harm. I still worship Yahweh, but I'll do this as well. It was just this drift, and I think we live in a culture now where the tools of that cultural magnetism are very, very powerful tools. And are invisible.
They're invisible a lot to us because we've just been saturated in the culture around us.
Yeah.
And we don't understand that we are so far away from what God has called us to.
I mean, cultural mindsets, and we could, I mean, we could do a whole series of episodes just on the various currents. In fact, I'm planning a sermon series just based on currents, sort of based off the book of Judges, but talking about what are the currents that we face now. But the ways of thinking and the mindsets. I mean, Paul says, do not, about being transformed by the renewing of your mind. Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I think we've just got to think of the cultural forms, the way that we can get indoctrinated, and the ways that we can get drawn into these things. I think you need to think about what makes you afraid. When we feel insecure or afraid, be very careful about the decisions that you make out of fear and a sense of insecurity.
Oh, that's a great point.
Because those are two of the main emotions that lead Israel into this compromise with idols. Because they just feel so afraid. Their security is shaken, and so I'll just do this. Yes, I trust God, but you know what? I'm just going to do this as well. Now, I hesitate to apply this, because sometimes they can be justifiable things, but the way that we depend on our bank account or our image, or the things that we do to fit into society, mindsets around, our sense of individualism and entitlement, almost this pursuit of image. Maybe not an engraven image of a God, but, creating an image of ourselves.
Yeah.
And this is, this gets sold to us through, powerfully through the media. I think you honestly, and I know I go on about this, but if we're binge watching TV and movies, and I love the art of movie making. I love a good movie. But we've really got to be careful about our media intake. Be careful of you might be able to justify it, but I think it can cause. I've talked a little bit before about this, about like narrative dysphoria, where we get so invested in this story, this fictitious story, that we actually get drawn out of the real story of what's really happening. I mean, there's a real critical thing going on, and we're so busy being drawn into lots of other stories and being emotionally invested in these other stories. And you might say, it doesn't affect me that much, but that actually is a problem that it's not, because our hearts are made to be sensitive, very sensitive to that sort of thing.
Yeah.
When people suffer and injustice and things that are portrayed fictitiously in this, it just desensitizes us to something that we should be sensitive to.
And that's and to bring it back, Matt, to let us wrap up this episode. That's why we've got the Book of Judges, things like the Book of Judges, to hopefully, in the shocking values in this book.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that this is a narrative that will shock us awake.
Yeah.
About the depths of where our heart will go.
Yeah.
And and I'm going to be really brutally honest here, some of us will go, I can't believe this is in the Word of God. There's stories of a woman driving a tent pole, tent peg through the woman's head, and there's this, and there's rape, and there's sex, and there's violence, and there's death, and there's cheating, and women, and it's all in the Book of Judges. It's awful. And then I go, okay, that's pretty awful for you. Didn't you just tell me about how you just finished binge watching The Bachelorette? What does that? And again, I'm being real. I'm going to step over the line here and be judgmental, because I'm like, what do you think the values are? Oh no, that's different. That's entertainment. This is the Word of God, and I'm like, wow. Okay, we need to be woken up here a little bit to understand that this story, to bring it back to what you said about narrative, this is part of our story. The Book of Judges is our story. That's right, we're part of this, and I know that this has brought it out of me huge awakenings to say, who am I listening to? What culture am I a part of? And that's. I don't want to be judgmental on anybody, but that's me. And I'm hoping as we go through the book of Judges together, we can wake up to that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, I know that can sound sometimes when we talk about stuff like this, it can sound a bit puritanical and what am I supposed to not ever watch television or no, we just be mindful of your diet. If I ate lollies, sugary lollies for breakfast, in the proportion that we watch, media, and the mind is a much more delicate thing even than the body. I mean, and I'm talking about the soul in that sense. So we've got to be very mindful of the fact that there is very strong spiritual currents that we can get drawn into, and if we raise a sail to the wrong kind of wind, we're going to get drawn up. And you might say, well, I'm not being, I can confront myself with all of this stuff and not be affected by it. Well, then you've got bigger problems, because there's your spiritual receptors are meant to be really sensitive to that sort of stuff, are meant to be very impressionable. So if you're not being then that not being affected, then that could be point to an even bigger problem. So that's an very unpopular message for our day, but I will keep going on about it, because I just think we need to be mindful of this. This is not about, what's right and wrong and what can I watch and what can't. I'm just talking about, yes, there is some stuff that's just like, you really don't need to see that. A lot of it is about proportion, about getting drawn into much more subtle things, actually. And let's be wise to that. If in doubt, here's what I'll finish with. If in doubt, take it to God. Take it into the light of God and say, hey, God, what do you think about this? And see what God says.
Wow. There's some wise advice from Matthew. If in doubt, take it to God. See what he says about it. I think that's a lesson we can learn from the book of Judges. Now, I don't know about you. I'm absolutely loving what we're discovering here in the book of Judges. And on the next episode, we're going to go through some of the big judges that we haven't met yet. So hang on to your hats, because things are going to get even crazier and darker from here. Now, don't forget, we have a very special offer just for you right now over at thrivetoday.tv. You can pick up Matthew's Deeper Places video series for half price. Do not delay. Get a hold of this great offer today over at thrivetoday.tv. Until the next episode, we'll see you soon here at Thrive.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Thrive Deeper. Matthew and DJ really appreciate the questions and thoughts about what you're reading in the Bible as you go through it with Thrive. Our home on the internet is thrivetoday.tv. You can contact us, ask questions, see all of our resources and much more at our website, thrivetoday.tv. The Thrive Today Network is on Facebook. Our Facebook page and links to our community groups are waiting for you. Just search and like Thrive Today page in Facebook now. Visit ratethispodcast.com/Thrive Deeper. If you appreciate what we do and want to help us reach more people, go to ratethispodcast.com/Thrive Deeper. Until next time, our prayer is that these shows will inspire you to go deeper into God's Word and thrive. This was another DJP.FM production.